He's a tough street-fighting lawyer with the highest ratings for honesty and integrity. He's here to answer your legal questions and get you the help you need. You're listening to The Legal Lowdown with your lawyer, Joe Ingram of Joe Ingram Law. Joe Ingram has more than 20 years' experience fighting for his clients here in the state of Alabama. Joe's focus is criminal defense and family law. You don't have to face your legal issue alone. You've got Joe Ingram on your side. In case of sensitive legal matters, you can always reach out directly to Joe at joeingramlaw.com and arrange for a private consultation. And now, Alabama's defender of the defenseless, protector of the people, and all-around good guy, Joe Ingram.
All right. You're back. This is the Legal Lowdown with Joe Ingram, your Alabama lawyer on WERC 105.5 in Birmingham, WBHP 102.5 in Huntsville, and WRTR up in Tuscaloosa. Please check out our podcast on Apple, Spotify, and even my YouTube channel, joeingramlaw.com. Remember, if you have a case, better call Joe. If you have a case, better call Joe. Today, we have a great guest in the studio with us. Ashleigh Dunham. She is running for the Alabama Supreme Court, Place 7. She's in the studio with us, and she's going to join us in just a second. It's going to be a great interview. You're going to enjoy listening to her today. In 2 weeks, we have the mayor of Cullman who's going to be on the show. I just got to announce that today. Looking forward to that interview as well. Our sponsors of our show are always, we're so thankful for our sponsors. Shelby Fence Company. Shelby Fence Company has been in business for over 30 years. They do expert fence installation. They do repairs across the greater Birmingham area. If you need them, call them 205-664-1551, 205-664-1551, or you can look them up, shelbyfencecompany.com. And tell them Joe sent you, by the way. The other sponsor of our show is Flat Fee Real Estate of Birmingham. They've been in business for over 10 years. They're locally owned and operated. They have 30 years of combined experience. They are true professionals if you're buying or selling a home, and they're with you every step of the way. If you need a real estate agent, call Flat Fee Real Estate of Birmingham, and they will take great care of you if you are buying or selling a home. I have great faith in Flat Fee Real Estate of Birmingham. Okay, folks, ladies and gentlemen, so today we have Ashleigh Dunham in the studio. Ashleigh, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
All right, Ashleigh, scoot up just a little bit to the mic. Don't be afraid. Don't be shy. Ashleigh, have never got a chance to meet you, so this is an introduction for both of us today. Tell Conservative Talk Radio a little bit about you, your background, and how you got here today.
Well, I always like to make the joke that I am a recovering divorce attorney. So I handled family law cases for the last 15 years. And about 10 years ago, I started going into fertility law because I was struggling to have a child. So I went through 5 years of fertility treatment and started handling cases like sperm donation, egg donation, embryo donation, and surrogacy, which I got to help build families instead of just handling the dissolution of families. And throughout my career, I've handled all types of cases. I actually started my firm by doing criminal law and doing commitments. So commitments where people have to go through the mental health system and they're trying to get back on their feet. I handled a lot of those cases as well. So I kind of had a little bit of everything, but mainly family law in my past until I started doing fertility law. And then a few years ago, I took the bench in the juvenile court as a referee, handling child abuse and neglect cases. So it sounds hard, but I got to protect kids every single day.
Yeah. Okay. Are you still doing that currently right now?
I actually resigned in January so that I could run statewide for the Supreme Court.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, let's go back just a little bit. Why did you go to law school? Why did you want to be a lawyer?
So as a kid, I started reading books about the Constitution at a very young age. It's really weird, but I was a fangirl for the Constitution starting very, very young. So when I was about 6, I think my mom ordered some I think it was on like, one of those paid things that you can get like a subscription or something. She would send me things about the U.S. and about the Constitution. I got really excited about it, and I just either wanted to be a lawyer or wanted to be Madonna. And luckily for my niece, I decided that I was going to be a lawyer. And I immediately started taking that path. Everything that I could learn about the law, I learned it as a kid. And then when I was in high school, I learned about international adoption and handling adoptions and how wonderful that sounded. So I decided to become an adoption attorney when I was in, high school and college. And then after I went through undergrad, I got a degree in political science and a minor in French and business, because a lot of the international custody laws are written in both English and French. I decided, maybe I could do a little bit of family law and divorce, because the Hague Convention passed while I was around the time that I was in college. So I knew that international adoptions were going to be much less.
Yeah.
So that's where I kind of decided at that point, I'm going to go to do family law, and that's what I'm going to handle. And I went to law school at Cumberland and never looked back. It's felt perfect.
Okay. I'm not sure if you said this, so if you did, I apologize. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Madison, Alabama, in the suburbs of Huntsville.
Okay. All right. Huntsville's a great place to be.
Yeah, my dad works for NASA, so huge fan of space and learning about all of that, but focus mainly on law.
Yeah, I just saw an article yesterday. Redstone Arsenal is the largest employer now in the state of Alabama. And up until the other day when I read this, it was always presumed it was UAB. But now it's Redstone Arsenal. So
yeah, so my dad, he works for NASA. My mom is an aerospace auditor.
Wow.
So, Huntsville's great for them, but I came down here to Birmingham and went to Cumberland and really fell in love with just being in central Alabama. It's really great too, but I do love going home.
Yeah. I think Huntsville has the greatest infrastructure because it was designed by engineers. It's really laid out well. We talk about Huntsville a lot on this show. So I saw that you're out campaigning all the time. You're doing your thing. I saw you were talking to a group up in, I forgot where I read it the other day, Ashleigh. I did my homework last night. You gave the same sentence about you either wanted to be a lawyer or be Madonna. Okay, so what is the affection for Madonna, if you will?
So the funny thing about it is, as a young child, like, she was one of those people who just had so much fun, and she was just very lively. And I almost felt like she was the ultimate girl boss, which is one of those things as a child growing up in that age, in that time period, you looked up to those people. But it's funny because it's just so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. There's no way, that I would actually be Madonna, but it gets a good laugh, and it gets people feeling like they can actually relate to somebody who's running for a position that is, honestly, most people don't even think about every single day. They don't realize how the Supreme Court impacts them. And I try to make sure that I'm relatable and I'm not just some cerebral person coming up there to talk to them and nerd out in front of them. I want them to realize that I am a real person too.
Yeah. I love Madonna. In fact, when I was in high school, there were several young female ladies that would dress like Madonna in school, during that time period. So, no, it doesn't matter to me. I love Madonna's music. I think she's great. I just was kind of curious about that. Okay, so you do fertility law. Let's talk a little bit about that. Let's unpack that. How do you get your clients for that type of legal practice?
So the first case I ever had was actually one of my nurses when I was going through fertility treatment. She wanted to donate her eggs to another nurse. Mm-hmm. And so my doctor was trying to find somebody who could help review the contract. And that's how I ended up jumping into that area. I already knew that it was something I may possibly want to do, but I didn't know where to start. So I actually ended up representing one nurse in his practice to help donate the eggs to the other nurse. But one of them was actually, I had to have surgery in the middle, like right afterwards. And one of them was my recovery nurse during my surgery. And one was the surgery nurse during my surgery. So it was a little crazy. And it's just a beautiful thing, though. I jumped right in. And then after that, I started getting referrals from agencies. There's agencies all over the U.S. and internationally. So I get agencies who refer me cases and then other attorneys. And I actually help other attorneys now try to figure out a surrogacy contract for their friends or their family members. A lot of the surrogacies are typically people who have gone through like cancer treatment, and they can't actually get pregnant on their own. So they have to go and, their best friend will carry for them or their sister, or just like with the nurse situation that they were best friends. And she said, I lose an egg every month. Might as well give it to somebody who needs it.
Yeah. So that brings me to the legal part of this. Obviously, I would think that type of law would be a little bit scary. You'd have to really have your malpractice carrier on notice if you really mess this up. So did that part of you scare you, or did you go start taking COEs and start doing some deep dive in this kind of research in this? I mean, talk a little bit about that, because it's a very serious issue and it can have very serious implications. You know where we're going down the road during this interview. So talk a little bit about that.
So for me, I was going through fertility treatment.
Right.
So I understood not only the law behind what was happening with my own body as I was going through it, with the doctors, what they risk, but I also knew what it was like to be somebody who desperately wanted a child. And so for me, I think about the intended parents, the people who are trying to get that child, who finally want their dream to come true. So for me, I studied endlessly. I got every book I could possibly get. Just like when I was a kid studying the Constitution, I over-prepare for everything. So I started reading about different ways that people do things. I've joined all the different groups. I've called attorneys who have handled these cases in other states, in other countries, and attorneys in this state who started to do it and then retired. So I talked to them and got their process. And there are actually 2 other attorneys in the state who handle these cases that I talk to probably 4 or 5 times a day, because we want to make it as safe as possible for everyone involved. We think about every single risk. And I'm in these surrogacy groups that are international on Facebook, and we chit-chat all the time about different things that can go wrong and how we can make sure that we protect our clients. So yes, it is something that there are a lot of risks, but you have a lot of risks in tons of different areas of law. But for me, my heart is beyond in it. And so I just try to make sure that these families are going to have a baby that comes home with them, and everything that I can do to make sure that happens, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, that's great. All right, we are talking with Ashleigh Dunham. She's running for the Alabama Supreme Court, Place 7, correct?
Place 8.
Place 8. My bad. I apologize. Okay. So during your campaigning, are you getting a little worn out now? Or are you ready to get your second win right after Labor Day, between Labor Day up to November? Is that where you are?
I am working as hard as I can to get that second win. I did get a phone call yesterday to be in a parade Labor Day weekend, so let's do it.
Yeah, the big push is coming after Labor Day. So when you go around the state and you get to talk to lots of groups, is this an area of law that you have to really explain to people, or do they have a general understanding? If you understand the question I'm asking.
I understand completely.
Yeah.
Nobody understands my area of law.
Yeah.
Nobody. It is one of those things where I even talk to groups with, other judges and having to describe to them what an embryo is, and having to describe to them what happened with the IVF case, and having to describe to them the IVF process. I have to start backwards and then slowly move forward, because people really don't understand it. Even people who are going through it don't understand it. I had a judge ask me, well, when an embryo is implanted, like when they have the transfer, when does the heartbeat begin? And I was like, whoa. You don't get a heartbeat until you get to 8 weeks. When an embryo is implanted, you're technically at that point as if you're at 2 weeks pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
So if the embryo even takes, you're not going to have a heartbeat yet. You're not going to have it for another 2 weeks. So I have to explain to people, or at that point, 6 weeks. So I have to explain to people going backwards every single time. So I can talk to them all day long about impact litigation and how that is very, very important, which is kind of how I get people to think about the Supreme Court is impact litigation, and how the IVF case, which was my trigger to run, that it was impact litigation. It was a case that impacted thousands of people who never set foot in the courtroom. And that's really how I get people to understand. I hardly ever even touch on the intricacies of what I handle every single day. And I focus more on the fact that I used to sit on the bench hearing child abuse and neglect cases, and the fact that the IVF case, which was my trigger to run, was impact litigation, just like Loving v. Virginia, just like Dobbs, just like Roe v. Wade, just like Griswold v. Connecticut, all of those different cases that impact thousands and thousands, sometimes millions of people, Plessy versus Ferguson. Those are the big cases that you need to think about. And the IVF case came along, and it's just like those.
Yeah. Let me ask you, what you do is contract law, obviously, with parties. Do both parties have to have representation, or is this a situation where one party can sign an acknowledgement of non-representation and not have counsel? Speak to that for just a minute, please.
So in this area of law, we are regulated by the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, which used to be located in Vestavia.
Mm-hmm.
No longer in our state. They are gone. But the American Society for Reproductive Medicine requires that both sides first have a psychological evaluation,
okay,
and then go through medical clearance to make sure that they're medically able to enter into this contract, and that we're not going to have any embryos that would harm anybody, or say check for communicable diseases. Following that, then we do contracts, and yes, both sides absolutely have to be represented.
Okay. So there's not a situation where one party is not represented by counsel in these situations.
It's too sensitive of a subject for that to happen.
Okay, good to know. Is that code law? Is that federal law, or is that just?
It's part of the guidelines for the American Society for Reproductive Medicine.
Okay, all right. So let me ask you this: is this something that this is between parties? Contractually. So is this something that you file with a court somewhere, or is this just between the parties unless it becomes a litigated issue? If you understand what I'm asking.
Yeah, so it is, at first, it is just between the parties.
Okay.
If anything goes wrong, then yeah, you would take it to court. So it's just between the parties outside of court. But when you get to the parentage stage, where you actually get, you go through and determine paternity and maternity,
mm-hmm.
when the baby's about to be born, then you get the contract validated by the court. Okay. So then you have the court, you file in the contract along with all the documents to make sure that we have parentage established before the child is born.
And that's probate court?
No, that's actually going to be in the juvenile court. So
in the juvenile court,
because you're establishing paternity and maternity.
So it would be through family court.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I learned something today. See, I like to learn. All right. So okay. So even though it's a contract, at some point it does get filed with the court, because in a sense, one person is having a child for another person, so they're having to file something with the court saying we're legally giving this child back to the parties that should own it, if that makes sense, how I'm asking it.
Yes. So what we end up doing is we get a pre-birth order, which comes out, and it's an interlocutory order that says, these are the parents.
Right.
These are the ones that get to make the decisions. They're going to go on the birth certificate. They're going to be allowed and be able to take the baby out of the room. They can actually be present during the birth. So we have all of that outlined to make sure that everybody's protected. Mm-hmm. Because the worst thing that could happen is if something happened with the baby and the doctors are looking to, well, who do we talk to about this?
Yeah, who do we talk to about who's on first, who's on second?
Exactly. So we get that before they even go into labor, before any of that happens. And then we get a post-birth order after the baby is here to make sure that the surrogate's not listed on the birth certificate. Because we actually, a few years ago, changed our maternity statute to say that it could be determined by judicial determination. So maternity is not just determined by birth, it's also by the court.
Okay. So in your experience doing this type of law, have you ever had a case that's gone sideways that had to be litigated?
No.
Okay.
I have had a couple that have been a few strongly worded letters back and forth, like, hey, you're not allowed to smoke during pregnancy, those types of things.
Right.
But besides that, no, everybody, most of the time, people end up, they end up sending Christmas cards to each other for years. They're best friends. Sometimes they will carry another baby for each other. It is truly a beautiful area of law.
Okay. But if there was a case that had to be litigated, it would be presumably litigated in family court. Is that what we're talking about? It'd be like a bench trial. Is that right? So first we put on there that we want it to be mediated. Okay.
Obviously, we don't want to put something so sensitive in the court system yet. So we try to mediate it with somebody who understands this area of the law, because I can only think about the disaster that would happen if we go in front of a judge that doesn't understand.
Doesn't know anything about
anything.
this.
Right.
Yeah.
So we first try to do mediation with somebody who understands this area of the law, and then that doesn't work, then yes, it would be litigated. And probably if someone's trying to keep the baby, we're thinking probably a situation where we would have to go to the family court. And if it ends up a situation where it's money related, we're thinking probably circuit court.
Okay. Wasn't trying to put you on the spot. Wasn't trying to put you in a bad position.
No.
I'm just trying to learn and understand this type of stuff.
The funny thing about that area is just that you have different avenues based on what the litigation issue may be.
Yeah.
So that's why it's kind of a weird answer, because it depends on if it's the money issue or if it depends on if it's a parentage issue.
And I'm also thinking, if this is contractual, could you put something in there that maybe that there's an arbitration clause that if we have a dispute that you'd have to go to binding arbitration? Could you
have that as well? Yeah. So,
okay.
A lot of states put that in there. We've been trying to do it through because Alabama, and we're a little behind when it comes to reproductive health care.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that we have enough people in the arbitration area that understand this area as well. So right now we just know that there are mediators who understand it, so we have it in the mediation clause first, and then going to court if need be.
Okay.
But I think arbitration is our next step, is once we find some arbitrators who actually truly understand it.
Yeah, I think that would be a good clause for this type of area of law, to keep it out of the court system and keep it, out of the news as much as possible.
Absolutely.
Okay, fascinating. See, you came here and you've been grilled for 22 minutes, but I'm learning. So
I love teaching.
Well, this is fun. I love this kind of stuff. Okay, all right. So, have there been a lot of litigated cases like this in the state of Alabama? Because I read the Alabama Law Weeklies, and I don't think I've ever seen these. I mean, I know a couple big cases that we're going to talk about in the second segment, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Week in and week out, this is not something that's heavily litigated in the court system. I mean, this is pretty much a...
Right. Yeah, I'll be honest, it's happy. It's a happy area most of the time.
Okay.
The only time we've ever had issues, you send a letter and things get fixed. But to be honest with you, if there is an issue, it's usually between the agency and the people who contracted with the agency because they're mad at them.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, when your surrogate hands you a baby, you're just happy that they did that for you.
Right.
They risked their life, to be honest with you, especially with Alabama being, number 3 in maternal mortality. It's a very big risk for her.
Yeah. Okay. We are talking with Ashleigh Dunham. She's running for the Alabama Supreme Court, place 8 as a Democrat. I got it right this time. We're going to go to break, and then when we come back from break in News and Weather, we're going to have our final segment with her. We're going to talk about some legal cases that's been in the news related to this. Fascinating conversation. We'll be back to you after the break.
You're listening to The Legal Lowdown with your lawyer, Joe Ingram. If you need confidential legal help off air, reach out to Joe at joeingramlaw.com. Stay tuned for more. Joe will be right back after this break for News and Weather. You're listening to The Legal Lowdown with Joe Ingram. Joe is a 20-year veteran of the Alabama courts specializing in criminal defense and family law. If you need a private legal consultation, email Joe at joeingramlaw.com. And now, welcome back to The Legal Lowdown with Joe Ingram.
All right, we're back for the second segment of the Legal Lowdown with Joe Ingram, your Alabama lawyer on WERC 105.5 in Birmingham, WBHP 102.5 up in Huntsville, and WRTR 105.9 in Tuscaloosa. We are speaking with Ashleigh Dunham, who is running for the Alabama Supreme Court as a Democrat, place 8. And she's in the studio with us today. Ashleigh, so right before we went to break, we were having a good discussion, and we talked about some issues during the break. So first thing I want to talk about, and why you're running for the Alabama Supreme Court, is the 2024 case off the Alabama Supreme Court related to, is it LePage?
Yes, LePage.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about that, educate our viewers on what that's about and everything.
So the LePage case came out when there was a situation in a hospital down in Mobile. A patient stumbled into their lab and picked up, I think the janitor had left the door open, they picked up a cryogenic tank, which is where they keep their embryos frozen, and the nitrogen that keeps it frozen burned their hands, and the person dropped the tank and destroyed embryos. And there were 3 different couples. They sued. And under their lawsuit, they said they determined that they wanted to move under cause of action for wrongful death of a minor, which was a law back in 1872, saying that they had caused the wrongful death of a minor, which means that the Supreme Court then had to determine whether or not that 1872 law dealing with the death of a minor should apply to embryos in 2024. And the Supreme Court determined that it did. They used there was a constitutional amendment saying that our public policy in the state of Alabama was the sanctity of life. And they utilized that as a vehicle to then say that an embryo was a life, and that the same as a child. And that would then give these same couples the ability to sue for more money and to recover more money over the destruction of those embryos, which then led to all of the doctors in the state of Alabama pretty much being very, very, very concerned about the possibility of something going wrong and an embryo being destroyed in, say, during a transfer, or if, say, a similar circumstance happened, or if their power went out. I don't know if you've heard about, there's been times where the power has gone out in certain areas where embryos would arrest, which is what it's called. That's what it's called when they're destroyed. Or when they stop growing. So it caused all the doctors to then say, whoa, if we're going to be if we're going to be able to be tried for murder, or if there's a situation in which we're going to be able to be sued for the wrongful death of a minor because an embryo is destroyed in the transfer process or something happening, we can't operate. So all of the clinics shut down. And at that point in time, for about 5 days, we didn't have IVF in the state of Alabama until a new statute was passed, which then said that anybody who was a provider of goods and services or was a patient of IVF was criminally and civilly immune of prosecution during the process of going through IVF.
Okay. So that makes me want to follow up with 2 questions. You would think that a hospital or a clinic or whatever keeps these embryos would have some kind of backup generation system, that if the power went out, that it's not going to, the embryos would dry out or arrest, as you refer to it. I mean, you would think they would have that, right?
I think a lot of them do. Okay. I think the one that happened in New York, I think there might have been like a snowstorm or something that happened, and everything, well, it was just a disaster. It's pretty terrible. And then I know that there was recently a bombing of a fertility clinic. I think it was in Nevada or somewhere in that area. Mm-hmm. So I think generally they do. And actually a lot of clinics now just ship their embryos to other places for storage purposes.
Yeah. So they're not responsible.
Yep.
We ship it somewhere, you keep it, chain of custody. It's not in our possession.
Exactly.
All right. So the next question is, And I think you said this in the first segment, and please educate me if I'm wrong. An embryo is not considered a life or something about having a heartbeat until 2 weeks. Explain it to me again for me being stupid. I'm sorry.
No, absolutely. It's very confusing, to be honest with you. So an embryo starts around the time that you have about 8 cells. And then it continues to stay an embryo until it becomes a fetus. So technically, an embryo is anywhere between 1 week, I think it's to 8 weeks around that time, and then it becomes a fetus. And then at that point, and this is all more medical terminology, but the heartbeat starts around 8 weeks, which is when you normally are able to go to the doctor. And so the embryos that were destroyed in this case, they were frozen. They had never been implanted in a uterus. They were just in a storage tank. And actually, the couple that sued under the Wrongful Death Act, that one couple had already, from my understanding, signed away the use of those. They weren't going to transfer any more of them. But that is a whole other line of information.
So I guess what the issue becomes legally, and the argument on both sides of the table is this embryo considered a life when you mix sperm with an egg, or does it become a life when it's done like an IVF procedure and inserted into a surrogate to grow?
Or your own
am
uterus,
I over explaining? Am I explaining this correctly?
No, you're explaining it exactly. Those are the theological questions that people ask: is when does life begin? I mean, you have, I think the Jewish religion says that it begins at breath. If you look at other religions, it begins the moment of conception. So there is a spectrum of, I think, everybody trying to figure out when life begins. It's more of a theological question. Not usually a legal question, but in this circumstance, it was a legal question. And from somebody who went through IVF, not once, but 3 times. The first 2 times I didn't get any embryos, and I didn't even have a chance at getting a child. So for me, I wanted to get to that. The embryos were precious to me. I really wanted them. But what I really, at the end of the day, truly, truly wanted more than anything was a child. And you can't tuck an embryo in at night. You can't read an embryo story.
But just because you have an embryo, okay, I'm probably going to show my ignorance here. Just because you have an embryo and you insert it doesn't mean it's going to take.
Exactly. You're right.
And if I'm using poor terminology, forgive me. I'm not a doctor, but I think you understand what I'm asking.
Absolutely.
Just because you create an embryo doesn't mean that that's going to lead to a pregnancy, right? Or
right.
Okay.
So an embryo, depending on the grade, which they actually look at, looking at through a microscope, they can tell you the chances of it working.
Yeah.
So for my embryos, when I eventually got embryos, I had a 4AA embryo, which was the grade. It looked at the size of the embryo, the outer core of the embryo, a lot of like the cells of the embryo, and basically I had a 72% chance of getting pregnant.
Okay.
Looking at that. So that was the best embryo you can get. Your best chances are 72%, and that's somebody going through infertility. I believe with a surrogate it's 85%. But yeah, so you're looking at some of these other embryos that if you don't even test them, you may have a 0% chance. You don't know.
So again, I want to go back to the decision because I want to understand, and I haven't read the opinion. We don't know, or maybe the court got this wrong, that just because it was an embryo, it's not really a person yet. And maybe they shouldn't have been able to sue for wrongful death. Am I saying that correctly? Or is that your take on it or position? So
the way that they ruled on it was that an embryo is a person. There's no going back from that. For me, like I said, I went through it twice. I have 2 other embryos. My first transfer was my daughter, and there's a huge difference for me between my daughter and embryos that I have not transferred yet. Have I been able to let those embryos go, knowing, or like donate them to another couple or anything like that? Have I been able to do that because of my emotional attachment to those embryos and the chance at having a child? No. But the thing is that we have so many ramifications from that ruling. Like if you are a couple and you're getting through a divorce and you've created embryos together, you no longer have a choice to determine really what you want to do with those embryos now. You are forever a parent to those embryos because they're considered persons under the law. If you want to donate them to science, you can't do that. If you want to transfer them to someone else, you have to figure out how to do that. There are people who no longer are in a relationship that are having to figure out what to do with their embryos. If you pass away and your embryos are stored, you really can't make decisions as to what you want to do with those. If you want to destroy them, or if you want to donate them to science, or if you want any of that, you can't really do that in your estate planning anymore because they're considered people.
That brings up two things. I had just forgotten about this. I had a divorce case 2 or 3 years ago that involved that issue where the parties had, gone to create embryos. I forgot about that.
Well, in our sister state, Georgia, they just had a case on that in 2023, right before the Alabama case. And they were arguing over what to do in a divorce, with what to do with the embryos. And at first, the lower court said, well, you know what? The wife is going to get the embryos because she did more to get them. Like she changed her diet, she changed her exercise, she was the one that injected all of the medications, and then she went through the surgery to get the embryos. And then the Court of Civil Appeals came back and said, no, it says in their clinic paperwork that if they don't agree, you destroy the embryos. So they destroyed them. Mm-hmm. So now, Alabama couples don't have that same chance. And no matter where you stand on that, it's a very personal issue.
Yeah.
And like I said, I still emotionally haven't made a decision on my own because it is a chance at having more children, and you just never know.
Yeah. I got a question when you were talking about the embryos and whether or not you wanted to gift them or whatever. Is this legal? Can you sell your embryos to another person?
No, you can't sell them. No.
I just say that shows my ignorance, but I'm asking. I don't know.
So an embryo donation is a donation through and through. So what you would do is you would donate them to another couple to use them and a lot of pro-life couples use that. They use the if they feel like they go through. You never know how many embryos you're going to get, right? So you could have 30, you could have 5, you could have 2. And so sometimes if you go through IVF and you do your best to get as many embryos for the best chance possible, and you end up with 15 embryos and you actually get 5 children from those embryos and you still have some left, couples will usually donate them to another couple. So that makes it kind of a little bit more difficult in Alabama because now they're considered children. So we used to call them embryo adoptions, but you don't know for a fact that you're actually going to get a child when you transfer them. So you don't want to spend adoption money on an embryo transfer that may or may not take.
Okay.
And I think the science is so complicated. A lot of people don't really understand how expensive it can get for the people who just desperately want a baby.
Yeah, I get it. Okay. All right. It falls under the same thought of in Alabama. You can't buy a baby in adoption, but you can go through an adoption agency and you can pay for the mother's medical bills. You can pay for the mother's food, rent, all these type of things while she's pregnant, but you're not buying a baby.
Exactly.
But you're taking care of the mother while she's pregnant, knowing that you're going to get to adopt that child when she delivers it.
Well, and in an embryo donation, you actually usually only pay for the storage fees. So you only pay for like the time that so every year you have to pay to store your embryos. I have to pay about $800 every single year. And then so if somebody then gets them donated to them, then they'll usually reimburse the donation, like the fees as part of the donation.
Yeah.
So it's basically like you're just paying for the storage for the other couple, because they weren't going to use those embryos.
Okay. All right. All right. So, Ashley, I only got about 10 minutes left with you, so let's talk really fast. I want to talk about the case down in Florida that we were talking about during the break. And we decided to call this the what?
The embryo the switch up.
All right. Great terminology. All right. So bring us up to speed, and what's your thoughts on that?
So from my understanding, in that situation, the clinic transferred the wrong embryo. This white couple ended up having a black child, and they were like, wait, this is not our child. And I know that they found the actual genetic parents, and the genetic parents have decided to allow them to remain parents. And so I think that that's one of those situations where it's very, very rare that this happens. And I feel like it's always on the news when it does, because it's one of those things where it's like your very, very worst nightmare and something that you wouldn't expect to happen. But every single time that it happens, it is all over the news.
Yeah.
And I think that it actually happened twice in Florida. To be honest with you, I think there was another case that I saw a couple of years ago with the same kind of issue. I don't know if it was the same clinic, though.
Yeah. We were talking during the break, and we talked about this case back in I think it was back in the winter or the spring when this hit the news. We were talking about it. And there were so many nightmare scenarios that they were thinking about class action lawsuits. You know, what could happen out of this scenario? What could happen out of that scenario? Well, if I got this, then maybe somebody else got that. And I think there were all these plaintiff lawyers that were coming in saying, well, we want to test all the kids over the last period of time to make sure, you know, they got the right child, things like that. So it just opened all kind of legal questions that as lawyers we sit around and think about, you know, worst case scenarios. What can come out of things? Because we're taught to look at life that way, right?
Well, yeah. And, you know, if you think about it, we now have an immunity statute that says if you're in the middle of going through IVF and all of a sudden they transfer the wrong embryo, you no longer have a cause of action, because that was our Band-Aid to fix the IVF decision. So if you were in Alabama and you have the wrong embryo transferred at this point in time, there's nothing you can do about it. So we really fixed that issue. And if you think about that as well, I don't know if you heard about, there was an embryo solution that had the wrong elements in it, and I think it was missing magnesium, and it caused embryos to arrest. So I don't know if you know how much IVF costs, but for me, my daughter, I think we ended up paying around $150,000 by the time we finally got her. Yeah, and I understand that is a lot of privilege to be able to pay that much, but it was over years and years, about 5 years of treatment. But there's you end up creating this embryo. Let's just say you only have to do one round of IVF. It takes you about $25,000 to get these embryos. There's a solution that was sent out all over the world, but particularly in the U.S., that was missing an element that caused embryos to arrest and stop growing. And if that solution is sent to Alabama and a couple spends $25,000 creating a child and hoping that to goodness that they get an embryo that will become their child, and it is destroyed by that, there's no cause of action in the state of Alabama, because we have that immunity statute now, which allowed the clinics to reopen. But I don't know if you know this, but during that same exact case that came through that was talking about the destruction of the dropping of the embryo and the destruction, they then, because of everything that happened and because of the immunity statute, they then sued and said, whoa, we no longer have a cause of action. This statute that y'all have created is unconstitutional. And they actually came to an agreement in January of 2025 saying, oh, wait, let's not actually determine right now that it's unconstitutional, because that was very unpopular. And we could just come to an agreement outside of court. And that today, we are one court case away from IVF stopping again, because the protection for IVF is unconstitutional.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, fascinating conversation today. I've learned a lot.
Yeah.
So let's talk about getting on the Alabama Supreme Court. Have you had a chance running for office to sit and think, if you get to wear the robe and you get to do the job, what's that going to be like day in and day out for you?
So I actually was talking to, I think it was Justice Murdoch a couple of months ago, And I made a comment about I loved law school. Like, it was one of my favorite things in the whole wide world, was just learn about the law and read about the law and just think about how I could make the world a better place. Thinking about, balancing the needs and what working families in Alabama truly need and what they're dealing with day to day and what I understand about the law. And I told him, I was like, if I could have stayed in law school forever, I would have loved that. And he's like, well, that's what you're running for, is to be in law school forever, is to consider your opinions and what you're reading about, what you're learning about from the cases that come before you, and making sure that it fits for the working families in the state. Because we have to be serious. I mean, we look at these laws and nobody thinks about the Supreme Court. And that's why I focused on that was why the IVF decision made me want to run, was because it showed me what happens. Not that many people go in front of the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And what happens there comes to our kitchen table.
Mm-hmm.
What happens there isn't abstract. It's going to impact your day-to-day life. It's going to impact your rights, whether or not you have certain civil rights. It's going to impact your family. It's going to impact especially criminal cases. It's going to impact estate administration and estate planning and what happens when a relative passes away. It's going to impact what happens when a relative gets hurt at work or you lose your job or just everyday struggles. That case really showed a lot of people, because it was so famous, how every single day the Alabama Supreme Court impacts people on their regular day-to-day lives.
Yeah. We're talking with Ashleigh Dunham. She's running for the Alabama Supreme Court, Place 8. Ashleigh, we got about 3.5 minutes left. So what's your schedule like between now and Election Day?
It is driving all over the state, talking to just everyday Alabamians, getting to know people, trying to talk to people, and bridging gaps where I can. I know that we have to run as a party in Alabama, but when people came in my courtroom, I never asked them who they voted for or what they thought about certain issues. I just tried to make their life a little bit better when they left my courtroom that day. I tried to make it better so that their children felt safe when they went home. So that's what I'm trying to explain to everybody. It's just to explain to everyone that I protect the kids every single day. I help make families. I help make life better for Alabamians, and that's what I want to do in the Supreme Court. I want to make sure that we bridge those gaps. And I know that we have to run partisan, but politics go away when that robe comes on. And so for me, I mean, I ran my own law firm for 11 years, and my law partner of 11 years was Republican. We balance each other out. And I feel like I can do that for the Supreme Court, is that I can come back and I can provide other opinions. Unlike most of the people on the Supreme Court right now, I have a young child. So I really, really care about the immediate future. I also have had several areas of law, but there's nobody on the Supreme Court right now that has handled family law. And that's what I've done. I have spent my entire career standing up for Alabama families, and that's what I want to do.
Very good. We got about 2 minutes left. Ashleigh, tell the audience a little bit about you personally. What do you like to do for fun? What do you like to do?
Well, to bring it back to Madonna, I actually teach dance. So I like a lot of cardio. So I have been a ballet dancer since I was 2 years old.
Okay.
Takes a lot of discipline.
Yeah.
And so I actually teach a little bit of all kinds of dance. And when I have a little bit of extra time, and when I'm not dancing and learning about the law, I am playing Super Kitties with my daughter.
Super Kitties?
Yeah.
What is that?
It is some little superhero kitty show, and my daughter absolutely loves it, and she really wants a cat, but I'm highly allergic. So we just have 2 dogs, and she has to get over it.
Okay. All right, folks. Well, we've had a fascinating conversation with Ashleigh Dunham. She's running for the Alabama Supreme Court as a Democrat, Place 8. We vote in November. Please turn out and vote. We've talked about the turnout this cycle, Ashleigh. It's been disappointing. And I have a pretty good idea of what the turnout's going to be in November. It's an off-year cycle election. Even though we have the governor and all the statewide races on the ballot, it's still an off-year election as far as a presidential election. So there's that, and we don't know what the weather's going to be that day. If it rains, everybody panics and says, I'm not getting out in the rain. So anyway, but look, I really enjoyed getting to meet you. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come in and sit down and talk to me today and educate my audience. I very much appreciate that. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. It was fascinating to just talk with you and be able to teach people about what I do every day.
Well, I enjoyed it, and I showed my ignorance today about some questions that you can't buy an embryo. All right, folks, we'll be back after news and weather for the second hour. Ashleigh Dunham, we'll see you, okay?
Thanks.
All right, bye.
You're listening to The Legal Lowdown with your lawyer, Joe Ingram. If you need confidential legal help off air, reach out to Joe at joeingramlaw.com. Stay tuned for more. Joe will be right back after this break for news and weather. You're listening to The Legal Lowdown with Joe Ingram. Joe is a 20-year veteran of the Alabama courts specializing in criminal defense and family law. If you need a private legal consultation, email Joe at joeingramlaw.com. And now, welcome back to The Legal Lowdown with Joe Ingram.
All right. We're back for the second hour of the Legal Lowdown. Joe Ingram, your Alabama lawyer on WERC 105.5 in Birmingham, WBHP 102.5 up in Huntsville, and WRTR 105.9 in Tuscaloosa. If you missed the first hour, you just missed a fabulous conversation and almost a lesson in embryo IVF treatment in the state of Alabama. Ashleigh Dunham, who is running for the Alabama Supreme Court, just did a fabulous job of giving all of us really good information, especially for me. It was really fascinating. So if you missed that, please go back and listen to that part of the podcast. It's really good. All right, so for the second hour today, we always want to thank our sponsors. The sponsors for our show are Shelby Fence Company and Flat Fee Real Estate of Birmingham. Shelby Fence Company is known throughout the greater Birmingham area. If you need new installation or repair, whether residential or commercial, they are the names to know, and they are the people to call. 205-664-1551, 205-664-1551, ShelbyFenceCompany.com, and tell them Joe sent you, and you can talk to Tim. Flat Fee Real Estate of Birmingham. Flat Fee Real Estate of Birmingham. They have been in the greater Birmingham area for over 10 years. They are locally owned and operated. They have 30 years of combined experience. Whether buying or selling, they are the names to know. Flat Fee Real Estate of Birmingham. They will take good care of you every step of the way, and you'll be glad you made the right decision. Tell Amy Joe said hi, and Joe told me to call you Flat Fee Real Estate of Birmingham. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some national and legal news of the week, if you will. And we're going to start today. We got to start today with some national news. And folks, I hate to hit them again, but we're going to hit Michigan hard. I don't know what's going on up in Michigan. I really don't. As always, believe it or not, you cannot make this story up. You cannot make this information up. In Detroit, Michigan, are you ready for this? Detroit, Michigan is now paying schools for kids to come to class. Yes. The school system is paying high school students and middle school students to come to class because they have such a high truancy rate. And they even have a program for it. High schoolers can earn $100 a week. Middle school students can earn $50 a week. They have high truancy levels between the winter sessions. Now, I want to stop for a second. I want to take you back to the movie, I think it's called Christmas Story, where they take the little kid, they dress him up in about 7 layers of clothes, and they wrap a scarf around his neck, and he waddles down the street to go to school. That reminds me of my grandparents telling the story about, when I was a kid, we walked up and down the hill without shoes on, 10 miles without water to go to school. So the kids need to get a little tougher up in Michigan if you're going to live in a snow area to go to school. Okay? Supposedly, the rate of truancy is roughly 61% up in Detroit, Michigan. And second of all, this is a really sad number in of itself. Believe it or not, only 15% of kids that come out of Detroit, Michigan schools can read on a proficient level. 15%. Now, this is a couple things I want to bring up. If you don't want to go to school in your high school, if you want to quit, quit. I don't care. Doesn't affect me. Second of all, why are the police and the schools not enforcing truancy laws? If your kids are not attending school, that's why we have truancy laws. Third, the federal government pays state schools money for every day a class is full of kids. So if you are now paying the students to come to class, how much money is the school system losing to put kids in the seats? And fourth, and this falls on the school system and this falls on the teachers, are you passing the kids through school and they're not learning because they're coming out and only 15% can read at a proficiency level? And so that brings up the next article that I read this week. And I read this because all the kiddies are starting back to school in the last week or two. There was a University of California, Berkeley professor that gave an interview. And this goes back to all these colleges doing away with the SAT and the ACT class scores for colleges admissions, the SAT and the ACT scores. We decided to do away with those because, the test is not fair to some people. No, it's a fair test. It's a measuring stick of whether or not you are qualified to be in a college classroom and take certain levels of classes. Anyway, this professor from the University of Berkeley gave a interview this week, and he teaches calculus. He's a mathematics professor. And he goes on and he says, it's really sad. He said, we have kids in our classroom that are not able to do basic algebra, and I'm teaching calculus. And he talked about the first 8 weeks of school, how he is trying to get them up to speed to do calculus. And then he goes on to say, and if you've ever stood in front of a classroom and taught any subject of any level, you will appreciate this. It's called the deer in the headlights look. He said, the kids look at me and they have the deer in the headlights look, they're gone, meaning they're not qualified to be in the room. They don't need to be taking college level calculus yet. They're not ready. They're not up to speed. And that is what we've done to education. We throw all the money in the world at education. We've dumbed it down, but the kids are not ready to do the hard work that they're in the classroom for. That's where we are. That falls on society. That falls on the school system. That falls on the teachers. And at the end of the day, we all suffer because we're paying for education in the public school system. My goodness. The next story to talk about this week, the primaries. More primaries this week. Communists are winning elections. They've been winning elections in Florida. But here's one thing that's happening. They are pushing away the communist socialist label. They're saying, get away from me. I don't want to be associated with that. But they're running on that agenda. But they don't want the label. And they're not asking the hard questions for supporting the communism agenda. Up in Virginia this week, Angie Nixon beat Alexander Vindeman. Do you remember our buddy Vindeman? He was in the military during President Trump's first administration. He was on a phone call when President Trump was talking to Zelensky of Ukraine, and he tried to be a whistleblower and get President Trump impeached for a phone call. The phone call was fine. President Trump was the only president that had offered Ukraine the Javelin weapons. President Obama wouldn't give him the weapons. So anyway, the funny part of this story, if you will, for me, is that Angie Nixon had a budget of roughly $974,000 to run her election. And Vindeman had a war chest of $16 million, and now he's gone. The little whistleblower weasel Vindeman is gone now. He's not going to be back. So come the fall, we're going to see if Virginia has embraced full-on communism, or if Virginia is always a purple state. Sometimes it's red, sometimes it's blue. It just depends. I believe that come the fall, that most people are starting to pay attention, and most people that are running for office as socialists that are really communist are afraid. People are not going to vote for that. And all of these polling agencies that are about to go back to work after Labor Day, that do all these polls for campaigns, people like me, you don't want to poll me, because I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm just going to show up and vote on Election Day how I want to vote. That's how true Republicans vote. We don't have to tell you. We didn't tell you the first time around with President Trump. We just showed up and did what we had to do. And there's been some polling agencies that have gone out of business recently because they've gotten it wrong. So for all those out there that are pushing communism, we're going to see how you fare well in November. And by the way, I want you to remember how the communists feel. They want to get rid of police. They want to get rid of ISIS. They want amnesty for everybody that's here in our country. They want to do away with the presidency. They want to do away with the Senate. They want to get rid of the Supreme Court. These are just few of the things on their wish list they want to get rid of, by the way. Yes, police. Somebody was asked this last week, so what happens if there's a murder in the street? And the person didn't really know how to answer the question. Because you're talking about anarchy. You're talking about civil war. You're talking about unrest in the streets. And I kind of like the police in my neighborhood. I kind of like the paramedics showing up if I have a 911 emergency. I kind of like that. So we shall see how this fares out in the fall in the elections. And the second thing I say, and I would ask anybody that is a journalist that gets to interview these communists, again, they have to take an oath in office to be a member of Congress. And the oath reads something like this: will you support and defend the Constitution? Will you protect it against all enemies, foreign and domestic? So help you God. Now, the oath of office that they are about to take, they want to tear it down. How can you take an oath in office that you are saying you want to do away with? You can't do that. It's called the first 10 Amendments. It's the Bill of Rights. Freedom of religion, right to own a gun, Fourth Amendment, search and seizure, Fifth Amendment, right not to incriminate yourself, Sixth Amendment, right to counsel, Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment. All of these, the first 10 Amendments, the goodies, they want to do away with. So we shall see how this turns out after Labor Day and the polling agencies. The next big story that we started talking about during the primaries, and obviously I was not wrong. Data centers have been huge, and they are a big issue in the minds of Alabamians and people on the national stage. Everybody is paying attention to the issue of data centers, and everybody has strong opinions about data centers in their backyard, or as we say it here in the South, in their neck of the woods, okay? One issue that has come about out of this is related to data centers is the thought of wholesale prices of energy have already risen between 2 and 6% nationwide, with increases in areas for data centers. Americans could soon feel the artificial intelligence boom in their pocketbook for their monthly power electric bill, if you will. There was some research done by the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, and yes, they are a non-biased entity, and they found that due to the rapid growth of AI data centers, electricity becomes more and more expensive for households in the coming years, meaning we're all going to pay for power. Researchers estimate existing data centers have popped up all over the country in recent years and have pushed wholesale prices up 2 to 6%. And this is only going to grow with the number of facilities that are being considered both nationally and in this state. And so if all these data centers are sucking all the power up and all the water up, there's only so much bandwidth to go around for power that is generated by our power company. And so this brings us to the cost increases of generating electricity could be 20 to 30% higher by 2028 compared to what it would have been without new data centers that are coming to a neighborhood near you. The people that are pushing data centers would like to tell you that does not mean that a family's electric bill is going to jump 20 or 30%. They're saying it's more nuanced than that, depending on the size of the data center and where you live and what kind of power you have. But I will tell you this. I worked at Alabama Power, and there is only so much power that Southern Company, Alabama Power, Georgia Power, Mississippi Power can generate. We have hydropower, we have steam power, we have coal plant power, and we have nuclear power. Nobody wants to build a coal-fired plant in their backyard. No one really wants to build a nuclear plant, even though nuclear is the safest form of energy. Now, it takes a long time to build a nuclear plant. It takes an enormous amount of money. But once you build it and you take care of it, it is safe and it lasts for a very, very long time. Nuclear is a good way to have energy. But the last time Southern Company just finished a nuclear plant over in Georgia, and I forget the name of it off the top of my head right now, it was way over budget and it was way over cost, and it takes a long time to recoup your investment, your ROI, return on your investment, for a nuclear power plant, if you will. So this is at the core of data centers, and it is a big issue on a national scale. Roughly 30 to 40% of people care about the issue of data centers in our country. So that is going to be a big issue nationally and in the state. So for all the politicians out there, whether it's Tommy Tuberville, whether it's President Trump, I do not care whether you're a Democrat or Republican, please do not ram this issue down our throats as citizens of this state. President Trump does not live here. I do not believe they're going to build a data center down at Mar-a-Lago. And if Tommy Tuberville does become the governor of the state of Alabama, whether he stays 4 or 8 years, he's not going to be here for the long term. He's going to Santa Rosa Boulevard to retire. They're not going to build a data center on Santa Rosa Boulevard, I can assure you that. So it's what happens in your neck of the woods that matters to you, because that's where you live, and you don't want a data center in your backyard. All right, so that covers the data centers. It's being talked about all over the country. The next issue I want to talk about that I forgot to bring up last week, up in the state of Massachusetts, the governor just passed a law and signed it in that abortion is legal up to the minute of birth. Yes, you can have a mother that is pregnant and decide to abort this baby up to the moment it's born. Now, they were all clapping in the governor's mansion when she signed it into law 2 weeks ago. And then it started hitting the news, and it's getting some drawback, if you will, that people are not happy talking about killing babies. If you're going to carry a child from 6 to 9 months, and then for whatever reason you decide not to have that child, give it up for adoption. Do not kill that child. That is a child. That is a growing child. And I've said this before. It's a little ironic that the same people that do not have a problem killing a child have a problem with the death penalty. I've said this before. Isn't it ironic? People that are for the death penalty are against, or the people that are for abortion are against the death penalty. People that are for the death penalty generally are against abortion. Isn't that ironic? I've always just found that kind of unique. I don't know why. So here in Alabama, Sweet Home Alabama, there was an article this week about data centers. Data centers are a multi-billion-dollar industry. All the Alabama top leaders are talking about it. You know, the data centers can buy lobbyists. They can put money in politicians' coffers to vote their way. But you got to come home and you got to see your people in your neighborhood, and you got to see them at the grocery store, and you got to see them at church on Sunday. And you have to ask them, why did you vote for a data center in my backyard? I was talking to somebody last night on the phone that lives up in Coleman, by the way. And the issue became, would you have a data center behind the All Steak restaurant up in Coleman, or would you put it out in the grasslands of Coleman where it's not around a family neighborhood? So the issue of data centers is, do you want it in your backyard, or do you want it in your neck of the woods? And so the politicians are going to have to start answering to the people and quit ramming that issue just down our throat of, we're going to have a data center and we're going to make a lot of money off of it. That's not how this works, folks. My thought is, if you believe Elon Musk, in 5 years, you're not going to need a data center on the planet. They're going to put a satellite. They can put it on the moon. You don't need that data center that takes up a huge swath of land, if you will. And look, I say this as a Republican. I do not want to fall behind China in any way on any issue. I'm just asking, we've got to stop and think about these questions and these issues on a mass scale because it matters to all of us. All right, that went fast. We're going to come back to the news and weather for the last segment of the show. Stay tuned for the Legal Lowdown with Joe Ingram. We'll be back in just a second.
You're listening to The Legal Lowdown with your lawyer, Joe Ingram. If you need confidential legal help off air, reach out to Joe at joeingramlaw.com. Stay tuned for more. Joe will be right back after this break for news and weather. You're listening to The Legal Lowdown with Joe Ingram. Joe is a 20-year veteran of the Alabama courts specializing in criminal defense and family law. If you need a private legal consultation, email Joe at joeingramlaw.com. And now, welcome back to The Legal Lowdown with Joe Ingram.
All right, we're back for the final segment of Legal Lowdown with Joe Ingram, your Alabama lawyer on WERC 105.5 in Birmingham, WBHP up in Huntsville, and WRTR in Tuscaloosa. The final segment of the week. It's gone by fast. I would encourage you to go back and listen to the podcast. Ashleigh Dunham was on in the first hour. She's running for the Alabama Supreme Court. We had a great interview. We had a very interesting conversation about embryos, IVF, fertilization, having children, things of that nature. I would encourage you to go back to listen to that. As always, you can go listen to us on Apple, Spotify. You can listen to us on my YouTube channel, joeingramlaw.com. As always, if you have a case, better call Joe. Look us up on the web, joeingramlaw.com, for all your legal needs. You can call my office, 205-825-5297, 205-825-5297. So this time of year, I get to talk about this because sometimes we don't get to talk about some issues I want to talk about. It's the time of year, fraternities and sororities. And my office handles Title IX cases, more specifically related to fraternities and sororities. And school has been back just a couple of weeks, and I've already had 3 calls in the last week related to fraternities and sorority cases. These can fall into the category of hazing. These can fall into the issue of people having fights in a fraternity or sorority house. And then there are the issues of the astronomical fees where somebody's paid to join a fraternity or sorority, and then they've backed out, and they're trying to collect the money, and they're like, Joe, can you help me get out of this contract? So we have all those kind of cases under fraternity and sorority type issues. And so if you'll give me just a second, I'd like to tell you about a brief case that I had with a major university in the state of Alabama a few years ago with a fraternity here. It goes something like this. A fraternity has a major party after a football game, and they employed a security service to monitor all the people at the fraternity house. So the security company just has contractors, 1099 employees. They're not even W-2 employees. They're just contractors, subcontractors, if you will. And there is a pledge at a fraternity house. In fact, he was a freshman. He was just a kid. Not even supposed to be drinking, by the way. And they're supposed to check that at fraternity houses. And so this person takes a beer, a full beer can that's unopened. You might as well have taken a baseball. And he throws this beer because he has an anger management problem, and it hits a security officer that is just working the party, just standing there, minding his business, just keeping the peace. And the beer can, it wasn't a beer bottle, it was a beer can, hits him in the face, almost knocks his eyeball out, breaks his eye orbit, if you will, his eye socket, and he has some significant injuries. The fraternity house really didn't care. He had to call 911 himself for treatment. The person that threw the beer can, was laughing about it. And then he ran out of the room. And so this is where Joe, the lawyer, comes in. The person that had the injury contacts me for representation. And this is a worker comp case because he's employed by the security company. But it also became a case of a personal injury case for me because I wanted to sue the fraternity house, and I definitely wanted to sue this little punk kid that basically could have killed somebody throwing a full beer can at somebody, basically at about 60 miles an hour. Think about that. And so we filed our lawsuit, and local fraternities that whatever entity they call themselves, and I'm not going to say any Greek letters here because I'm not going to get in trouble. These are not the national chapters. These are just the local fraternities. The national chapters have a totally different name at the end of the day. And they don't make it easy for you because they know you're coming for money. And it took me about roughly 4 months to work my chain of work up the chain to find who is the national chapter, because no one wants to help me find them. But we finally find the right entity, and we sue the national fraternity. And so during the course of discovery, where you're asking for information, we ask for their policy limits of their insurance. And this is what's really interesting. This is what's really great. Their insurance carrier, like you have State Farm, you have Allstate, Progressive, whatever your insurance carrier is. For this fraternity house at this university in the state of Alabama, their insurance carrier is Lloyd's of London. Let me say that again, Lloyd's of London. That's a big carrier, okay? Their insurance policy was like $50 million in coverage. I was like, wow, that's great. We don't have to worry about money here. But I just wasn't after the fraternity house. I wanted the little punk kid that threw the beer can. I wanted to extract some measure of pain on him and some justice, if you will. And so my process server was trying to serve this person numerous times, and they just kept avoiding service. And I've done this before in different cases, and I'll tell you another story another week when we talk about a divorce case and process of service. And so I told my process server, I said, I tell you what to do. I said, I want you to go buy a big box, and I want you to fill it with like a care package. I want you to buy chocolates. I want you to buy a teddy bear. I want you to buy, whatever you would think that you would get from home if you were away at college. And I said, I want you to package up this big box, and I want you to put some letters on it like UPS or FedEx, or make it look like it's a real package. And I said, I'm even going to go all out, and I want you to go get like a UPS shirt, like you're really, really, really working for a company delivering a package. He said, Joe, this will never work. I said, just trust me, it'll work. And I said, you got to really sell it. And I said, I even want you to go buy some balloons, and, the kind of balloons that says, I miss you, we love you, happy birthday, whatever it was. And I said, I want you to go deliver this package, deliver it personally to the person at the fraternity house. to make him think that mom and dad really miss him. So he does it. And sure enough, the person comes running to the door to get their care package. And he says, "Smile for the camera. You're on camera now. You've been served with your lawsuit." And his face turned from a grin to almost tears in about 2 seconds. He said, "You've been sued, dude. We'll see you in a courtroom." So then I had the parents, because they're responsible for him because he's a minor. He's still a minor. And so I exacted some measure of pain, and I got my little bit of justice for my client that was just doing his job. He was just a security officer. And I hope that person learned a lesson that day. So that just lets you know that my office handles Title IX cases all the time related to fraternities and sororities in the state of Alabama. All right. Something else I want to talk about this week that we don't get to talk a lot about. My office handles worker compensation claims. And we got a new workers' comp case this week. And I was really shocked because my client works at a major company. He's a brick mason, by the way. And he was injured on the job. He fell over a railing system and fell about 12 feet. He fractured 3 bones in his face. In fact, ironically again, he fractured the bones around his eye socket. His eye is totally black and blue. The white part of his eye is bloodshot red. He looks really bad. And he came in to hire me, and we talked about the case. And he said, "Joe," he said, "my employer and the safety director said, if you won't make us file a workers' comp claim, we're going to pay you your full wages, and you just take some time off and you come back when you're ready." I said, "Are you kidding me? You fell 12 feet. He had to go to the ER in a paramedic truck." I said, no. You're not going to do that. You're not going to do that. We're going to have to file a lawsuit. We're going to have to file a case. He had a CT scan. We don't know if he needs to go have some MRIs on his neck, his back, his spine, his shoulders. We don't know the extent of his injuries yet. It just happened the other day. And they just wanted him to pass all away his worker comp rights under the Worker Comp Act of Alabama, just to pay him his full wages for a couple of weeks and then come back to work. So we're not going to do that. We're going to file a worker comp case. In fact, I filed it today, and they should get served by next Tuesday or Wednesday. So if you have a worker comp case, please call my office, 205-825-5297, 205-825-5297. Or you can look us up, joeingramlaw.com, for all your legal needs in the state of Alabama. My office handles cases from Huntsville, Birmingham, Montgomery, and even the Mobile area if you need legal representation. And remember, if you have a case, better call Joe. If you have a case, better call Joe. All right, so we got to talk about worker comp cases. We got to talk about Title IX cases today. And now I want to talk about something that my office is always looking for whistleblower lawsuits. Now, I want to talk a little bit about whistleblower lawsuits. Those can come in all shapes and sizes. And these are the type of cases that my office is always screening for. Let's pretend for a second that you are an accountant and you work for a company, and the company sells, or the company buys medical equipment to do medical procedures, outpatient procedures, if you will. Just stick with me a second. and you buy your medical equipment from China, because obviously anything that comes from China is cheaper than if it's made here in the good old USA, America. And you're the accountant for the company. You might even be the CFO of the company. And here's where it becomes fraud, and this is where it turns into a whistleblower lawsuit. You're buying medical equipment 10 cents on the dollar. But when the company does their taxes and they report their taxes and their expenses and their losses to the government every year versus their income, they are taking the value of what it would cost to buy the equipment here in the United States. That's a no-no. You're cheating the government saying you paid X for medical equipment when you really paid Y. And not only that, you know that President Trump would love that case. The Department of Justice would love that case because of the tariff war we have with China right now. And not only that, we have a customs invoice of what the company paid for that piece of equipment that you've reported to the government that you paid $1,000 for when really you only paid maybe $1,500 for. That's where the fraud comes in. That's where the whistleblower case comes in. That's where the lawyer comes in and says, this is a whistleblower lawsuit. That's where Joe gets to come in and shine and talk about it being a case. And we were actually investigating a case like that, and we got really close. I needed 2 people to go on the record. I could only get 1. We believe that even the CFO refused to sign the financials going forward because they said, we're not going to sign the financials anymore. This is fraud all day long, and we're not going to do it. And they resigned from the company. But I couldn't get anybody to go on the record. I think maybe some of the people at the top were either bought their silence, got a severance package, green mail, whatever term you want to use to call it. So we didn't get that case. It had been a really good whistleblower case. Another type of whistleblower case that could be out there. Maybe you work for a home health care company. Maybe you work for an agency that does hospice care. Maybe you go to nursing homes. Maybe you go to senior citizen homes. Maybe you are supposed to go out to people's homes to give them their medication or help them assist with bathing. And you know that the invoices that are being submitted to either Blue Cross and Blue Shield, Medicare, Medicaid, Aetna, whatever insurance entity it is, they are fraudulently being submitted. And you would say, well, Joe, what are you talking about? Well, maybe the company saying that the nurse is going out 3 days a week and the nurse is only going out 1 time a week. Maybe they're saying that someone's coming out to assist the person with their personal hygiene and baths 3 times a week, and they're only coming out 1 day a week to give a bath. But they're turning in fraudulent invoices, and they're getting reimbursed by either an insurance company or Medicare or Medicaid or the government in some way. That's fraud. And every one of those invoices becomes an individual claim. And it has fines and penalties and fines, penalty, and interest assigned to each one of those fraudulent claims. That's the type of whistleblower claims that we're always exploring and looking for. And then there's another type that I've had in the past. Let's say that you are a truck driver and you're driving a truck for a truck driving company, and you know that you're being told to fraudulently change your logs of how many hours you're working versus how many actually hours you're driving. Because we know that truck drivers work 7 days a week. You know that you got to get that freight from wherever you're taking it to wherever it's supposed to go. The company doesn't care whether you sleep or not. They don't care if you doctor your logbook. Just get it done. Just get it there. So if you work for a trucking company and you know that transportation logs are being fraudulently submitted and turned in, that's a whistleblower case. That's a whistleblower claim. Also, for the trucking industry. They have black boxes in the trucks. They know how many hours the truck is actually on the road and running. What if they are turning off the computers of the computers in the cabins of how many hours they're actually running versus how many they're actually on the road? That is a whistleblower lawsuit. Now, these cases take time to develop, but they're not as hard as they appear. All you need are really good witnesses, really good facts, really good evidence, and these cases develop and to build on their own. And the thing about these type of cases, if you deal with these type of cases, you're generally talking about companies that have significant money assets, maybe on the stock exchange, maybe on the NASDAQ. If you are the plaintiff in one of these cases, you can get significantly money back for yourself for being a whistleblower, stopping the fraud that's happening on the American people, that's happening on the government. That is the incentive to you if you participate in a whistleblower lawsuit. And so those are the kind of cases that I like to investigate, and we get those every now and then. The other type of case that I want to talk about today that we don't get to talk about a lot. My office still does business law. We do shareholder lawsuits. We do shareholder derivative lawsuits. We do lawsuits where it might be a company that's not on the stock exchange, but they are 4 or 5 owners of the company, and they're all shareholders, and they each own a different percentage, and they get into a fight about the operating agreement, and maybe somebody's wanting to purchase the company, but there's a fallout between the parties. I've had a number of those cases over the years. We love to do business law at my office. It involves contracts. It involves corporations. It involves business law. It is so much fun to involve those type of breach of contract claims related to a business lawsuit. Also under that umbrella is we represent a number of contractors. You may be a carpenter. You may be the painter. You may be the guy that is the landscaper for the general contractor that builds homes. I had a contractor one time that built I think it was like 20 or 30 houses, and he had painted all of them in this neighborhood. And he came to me, and he was Hispanic, and he said, "Mr. Ingram, I painted all these houses, and I haven't been paid a dime yet." He said, "I had to pay my employees. I had to pay for the materials. I've got a line of credit with the painting company." He said, "I've run out of room." He said, "I have no room to run my company, and the general contractor won't pay me for the houses I painted." And I said, "Well, did you have an agreement where you only got paid when the house sold?" He said, "No." He said, "I'm supposed to get a draw every time we finish a house." And so we sent out a letter, and we said, "Look, dude, my client painted 30 houses for you. If you're not going to pay him, we're going to sue you here." And he got paid really fast for the houses he built. And those type of cases are still out there. They happen all the time. And those are the type of cases we explore. And we're always willing to assist folks that have those type of cases. So we got to talk about Title IX cases today. We got to talk about whistleblower cases today. And we got to talk about breach of contract and business law cases today that we don't always spend the kind of time to talk about that we enjoy doing. As always, we always like to talk about matrimonial divorce law. Let me ask you something. If you are about to get married, I want you to take a trip down to divorce court. Just go into court one day and sit in on a divorce proceeding if you're about to get married. Here is what you're going to hear in a divorce court, and here's what you're not going to hear in a divorce court. There is nothing in that room that says, "I love you." There is nobody on that stand that says, "I love my spouse." There is nothing on that stand that says, "I love my children." In fact, it's all to the contrary. The person on the stand is saying, "I hate my spouse. I hate that person. They're a bad parent. They're a bad husband. They're a bad wife. They're a drunk. They're a drug addict. They're a gambling addict. They have a porn addiction. So before you go get married, please go take a trip down to divorce court. Just sit on the back row and watch. And here is why. Go get a prenup. It will save you so much money. It will save you from hiring me in the end if the marriage does not go well. We did 5 prenups in the month of August. I've been preaching it. Somebody's listening because we did 5. So if you're about to get married, please go down to divorce court. Just listen in for about 2 hours and see how much love and sympathy you hear down there. It's not there, folks. It's not there. All right, that's going to wrap us up for the week. Next week, I don't know who our guest is going to be. The week after that, we have the mayor of Cullman, Alabama, that's going to be on the show. You will want to tune in and listen to that interview. We've got some big interviews coming up in the month of September. You will want to listen to those. Always, please go listen to us on Apple, Spotify. You can look us up on my YouTube channel. You can watch the video portion of the show. You cannot see the video show last week because Joe is an idiot, and Joe forgot to hit the save button when we closed out the show. So there is no video from last week. Got to go. We'll see you next week. Have a good week. Got to go. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Legal Lowdown with your lawyer, Joe Ingram of Joe Ingram Law. Don't forget to follow Joe's Legal Lowdown podcast on iHeart. If you need a private legal consultation, reach out to Joe on his website, joeingramlaw.com. Tune in again next Saturday for the Legal Lowdown with Joe Ingram. No representation is made that the quality of legal services to be performed is greater than the quality of legal services performed by any other lawyer.